Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Mental Health and Suicide in the Workplace webinar. I'm Brad Collins and I'll be facilitating today. As a first point of call, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land in which we meet and pay my respect to their elders past, present and future. For where I'm at today, that's the Turrbal people from the Brisbane River Basin area. The CIBSE Journal Supplement, the official journal supplement for the Australian and New Zealand region, Engineering Buildings Winter Edition 2020 is out now. This is one bumper edition with feature articles on adapting the Education Centre, Super Labs and a renewable energy update. Download it at cibse.org.au. CIBSE ANZ Virtual Seminar 2020 Vision for a 2030 Reality. This program brings experts from both sides of the Tasman to share case studies, net zero building practices, as well as new information on future policy changes that building owners and service engineers need to understand. In addition to 10 presentations, this event will offer delegates the opportunity to participate in deep dive thought leadership focus sessions, learn from additional international case studies and other net zero CPD webinars, speed network with small breakout areas, and learn about the products and services that can tackle the climate emergency and deliver net zero buildings. Register at cibse.org.au. for a limited time ticket start from $99. CIBSE upcoming technical events. CIBSE ANZ will continue to provide all CPD sessions in the webinar format to protect the health and safety of our members and the industry in light of the COVID-19 pandemic. You can register to attend any of the sessions at cibse.org.au. ARBS 2021. A reminder that ARBS 2020 has been rescheduled to the 15th to the 17th of February 2021 at the Melbourne Convention and Exhibition Centre. It's Australia's biggest HVAC trade event and will showcase hundreds of new products and technologies which are set to shape the future, with a focus on emerging trends and technology in the areas of smart IoT solutions, automation and control, refrigerants, energy efficiency, plus much more. Over 3 huge days, visitors can connect with manufacturers and distributors to see the latest products and applications, whilst exploring leading design and innovation in the HVAC space. Visit CIBSE on stand 82 at ARBS 2020. Just some quick housekeeping notes for our presentation today. Today's presentation will be a 30-minute presentation with a 15-minute question and answer session at the conclusion. The presentation is being recorded and will be shared with all attendees after the webinar. And just a reminder that any questions can be raised through the question and answer box. Delegates are welcome to ask questions at any time through the presentation. Today's presentation on mental health and suicide in the workplace is brought to us by Mates in Construction, a peer-based mental health and wellbeing support program operating within the built environment industries. Our speaker today from Mates in Construction is Liam Cubbage. Liam is the Senior Case Manager at Mates in Construction in WA, where he's worked for over 5 years. Liam's background is in the psychology field, where he's been involved for more than a decade, with vast experience in the Indigenous, youth, parent, counselling and suicide prevention areas. Would you please welcome Liam?
Thank you very much, Brad. First of all, I'd like to thank CIBSE for inviting us here today and being a supporter of Mates in Construction and giving us the opportunity to present to your members and delegates. Today we're going to go through a few different topics. First of all, we're going to look at a little bit about Mates in Construction and our history and why we exist. A little bit about our programs and also other programs and how we are working within the employment-based sector and the construction industry to sort of reduce the rates of suicide and improve the mental well-being of workers in the industry. And then we'll close out with some information sort of around COVID and what the impacts of COVID-19 pandemic have been on not just the industry, but the support services and mental health services and how workplaces are approaching supporting their workers as we go forward. I'll start a little bit about Mates in Construction, as I said. Mates in Construction is a not-for-profit, non-government organisation. We're a charity-based organisation that works actively on suicide prevention in the construction industry. The history about where Mates in Construction came from. In 2006 in Queensland, there was a Royal Commission that was conducted into work, health and safety and deaths in construction. As part of that Royal Commission, it was uncovered that a disproportionate amount of deaths in construction were suicide related. Sort of coming from that was a report that was conducted by the Australian Institute of Research and Prevention, or otherwise known as ASRAP, to support that Royal Commission that looked into the suicide rate in construction to try and determine what was going on there. And as part of that research, it uncovered that suicide in construction was quite prevalent. And unfortunately, the rates of suicide in construction were distinctively higher than those of the general population in Australia. But I guess more poignantly, it highlighted that workers in construction are 6 times more likely to die by suicide than they are from a construction accident. As a result of that Royal Commission, it was suggested that the industry look at an initiative or a program to try and reduce those rates and bring them more in line with the rates of the general population. And Mates in Construction became that initiative. So that was implemented in Queensland in 2008. And since then, based on the success of the Mates in Construction program, was rolled out to states WA, South Australia, Northern Territory and New South Wales. So Mates in Construction program now has representation in all the mainland states of Australia and also New Zealand as of early this year. So as I mentioned, from the initial program, we'll talk a little bit about what that program is, how it's implemented and what that looks like as we go forward. But the success of the Mates in Construction program then allowed us to move into aligning industries like Mates in Mining, Mates in Energy, and Mates in Rail is currently being piloted, while Mates in Construction in New Zealand opened in January this year. We're overseen by Mates Australia, who oversee our different branches. So Mates in Construction is primarily aimed at increasing a workforce's knowledge around mental health and suicide prevention, increasing their skills and hopefully reducing the rates of suicide in the aligned industries. But I want to talk a little bit about why mental health has become such a focus for our workplaces in recent years. And it's been determined that workplaces provide really advantageous environments for conversations around mental health and developing skills around mental health for a range of different reasons. Mental health in the workplace. So as I mentioned, mental health is a prominent issue in today's society, and over time, both government and private enterprise has identified the workplace as an efficacious environment for mental health education. And there's several different reasons why this is. First of all, the investment in mental health and education and support provision in workplaces not only improves the outcomes for the target organisation, but also allows for transfer of skills and knowledge into a wider range of community populations. So what that generally means is that if we can invest time and money into upskilling and providing education to people in the workforce around mental health and around suicide prevention. Those knowledge and that investment doesn't just stay within the workplace. What happens is the recipients of that education, the recipients of that skills development, take those skills back into their other community populations. They take them back to their education communities. They take them back to their families and friends and sporting and recreational groups and social groups. And the investment into workplace mental health is actually an investment into community mental health as well. Creating pathways to support through peer support programs such as EAP services on the Mates in Construction program, and increasing access to support from employees helps to address some of the barriers that might present for workers and people in accessing support for their mental health or accessing support to address their life issues. It can be quite difficult for someone who is experiencing difficulties with their mental health or is trying to juggle life issues that are impacting their well-being to try and access supports around their daily routine when most of their emotional and physical effort is really going into maintaining that routine and trying to get to their job and be productive and trying to maintain their families and their financial responsibilities, and to have to take time off work to investigate or research support services or to engage in the public mental health system or those different sort of avenues can be quite difficult and actually add stress to a person's situation. So by implementing programs like Mates in Construction, by providing EAP or employee assistance programs to employees, we're actually reducing the stress that results from having to access themselves. They can go to their workplace and they know that they can access that support within their routines quickly and confidentially in most cases, without it having to be a direct impact on their ability to do their job or to maintain their daily routines. Mental health education, suicide awareness trainings, peer support programs, and information provision all work to reduce stigma in the workplace. And the idea that Mates pushes, and I know a lot of other programs and organisations that are working towards better mental health in workplaces, raises around reducing the stigma. The more conversations that we can have about suicide, about mental health improvement, about well-being inside the workplace, and the more information that's provided and the more education that's delivered inside the workplace helps to reduce the stigma of seeking help. And really that's what our program and most of the other support programs like EAP services are trying to do, is to encourage people to seek help when they need it, and to try and create environments where someone who is struggling feels confident and comfortable in accessing that support. And if we create an environment where these conversations are going on, the end effect of that is people are going to be aware of that support and feel like that their employer and that their colleagues are understanding of their struggles, and that they're not alone in that sort of that seeking of a little bit of extra assistance to help manage what's going on for them. It also improves help offering behaviours, and that's just as important. We're going to talk a little bit today about some of the things that you can look for in your co-workers, family, friends that might indicate that they are struggling and could use a little bit of a hand. But if we create processes and systems within the workforce that promote offering help and noticing how people are doing, we're going to go a long way to supporting that workforce as well. Our workplaces that are suicide and mental health aware are better equipped to intervene on potential suicides and better equipped to have positive mental health outcomes for their employees and their co-workers. And that's true of most things. The more we work at something and the more we train and educate, the better we get at handling it. But the key driver, well, not the key driver, but the one of the added benefits for employers and companies is that mentally healthy workplaces report increased productivity. They have higher levels of staff retention and lower levels of things like presenteeism and absenteeism. And when you combine all these things together, it's not just a moral and legal obligation that we have, but there's also financial and productivity benefit to supporting our workforces in our communities. Another reason why the workforce is such an important place, especially in terms of suicide prevention, is that a full-time employee will spend nearly 2,000 hours per year at work. And when you think about that, it's actually more time than we get to spend with family or friends or sporting teams or social groups. We spend the vast majority of our waking hours at work with our co-workers. And what comes with that is learnings about an individual and understanding their patterns of behavior and their patterns of communication. And that goes alongside the expectation or the norms of communication and behavior at work. And because we get to see so much of that, we get exposed to our co-workers and our colleagues' patterns on an extended period of time. We are in a special place to be able to identify people who might be struggling when there's shifts from those patterns of behavior or communication. And that's a core part of the training that we deliver at Mates in Construction. As I said, we'll get stuck into that pretty soon. But it provides a really good environment for us to be able to identify people who are struggling and be able to offer support through the structures that we implement prior to it becoming a crisis situation. So how does the Mates program work? What do we do? What do we actually, how do we develop these peer support networks and how do we ensure mentally safe and healthy workplaces? Well, our program's sort of based into 4 different services, I guess, that we deliver, 3 of them being our primary training services. Mates in Construction's programs and trainings were developed in conjunction with an organisation called Living Works. Living Works are a Canadian organisation that are now world leaders in community-based peer support, suicide prevention development. It's a lot of words, but they're an organisation who have specialised in creating suicide awareness and interventions for communities. And Mates in Construction partner with them as we view the construction building industries and now our mining and rail and energy industries as communities. And while they're not necessarily geographically bound communities, they might be within a single site or a single company, but greater than that, they still function as a community. So Living Works trainings have been peer reviewed and research into their effectiveness has been conducted for over 35 years. And our role with them was to adapt the trainings to be more palatable to the industries that we work within. And the 3 different trainings that we deliver work together to create that network. So the first level of training that we deliver is our general awareness training. It's 45 to 50 minutes long and is designed to be given to all workers on site or in an organisation. And it's designed to create a sort of net of people who are more suicide aware, who are more aware of people's signs and symptoms that their mental health or their life issues might be impacting on them. And it seeks to really tick 3 key boxes. First of all, it highlights the statistics around suicide in construction and why suicide in construction is a problem. Secondly, it highlights some of the things that they can look out for in their co-workers that might indicate they might be struggling with life issues, mental health, or suicide. And thirdly, it shows them the pathways to support and how the program works to get support for people who they might identify as being in need. So when all those things come together, our general awareness provides a raising of the baseline understanding of suicide within an organisation. It also provides an opportunity for workers to access help as well. So post our training, we have an option for workers to get a call back from one of our case managers, which I'll talk about in a second, so they can confidentially access help right there in the moment. The second part of our training is aligned with Living Works Safe Talk training. So we call them connectors. And ideally we have 1 in every 20 workers are trained as a connector. And they receive a slightly higher level training. It goes for 4 hours. And it's designed to be able to teach and give someone the skills to be able to sit with a person who is struggling, have a conversation about what's going on in their life, and ask them about suicide. And it's important that they directly ask them about suicide in a caring and confidential manner. And if the answer to that question is yes, we give connectors the skills to be able to keep somebody safe for a short period of time until they can be connected with someone who can intervene on that planning and create safety and support networks around them. The third training is our assist. So this is our top tier training, directly aligned with Living Works assist training, and is a 2-day training, which delves quite deep into the understanding about suicide and what people are experiencing in their lead up to their suicide ideation, and gives them the skills to be able to intervene on a suicide plan, create a safety plan, and access the vitally needed supports along the way. So I'll just skip forward a little bit. The way the program looks in the industry is we come through and do a general awareness training and hopefully create a safety net of people that might indicate that somebody might pick up the indications that somebody is struggling. So if they do pick up that somebody's struggling, they might feel confident enough to go and have a conversation with that person about what's going on. But if they don't, we have other workers that they can go to, our connectors or assist workers. So if, say, Joan notices that Carol's struggling, but doesn't feel comfortable enough to go up to Carol and have that conversation, Joe can go to the connector and say, look, I've picked this up about Carol. I've noticed that she's not herself and that things are really hard for her. Can you go and have a chat for her? And our connectors have the confidence and skills to be able to go and do that in the workplace. So from there, I'm going to take you through a little bit about our general awareness training, so that white sticker training that we spoke about. As I said, the general role here is to give people a few basic skills to be aware and look out for people who might be struggling. And this is directly from that training. It's just a subsection that we do somewhere in the middle. So a key component of what we're trying to do is to get people to look out for each other and notice some of the changes along the way. And we come through a section of the training where we like to talk about life events that cause stress. And we generally speak to the group and ask them what causes them stress, and we get a lot of different answers. And we highlight a few examples of some of the stresses that people experience throughout their journey of life. Many of these are experienced by us all at some point, whether that be now, later, in 5 years. We go through these at some point. And some of the things we talk about are things like a family crisis. If somebody gets sick or unwell and they happen to be the key emotional support for the family or the key financial support for the family, that can be quite stressful for those that are left to care for that person and to try and pick up the pieces around the family responsibilities. Relationship breakdowns are really big, a big stressor for people. Financial stress, constant stress, things like the death of a friend or a family member, or the anniversary of a death of a friend or a family member. And these aren't designed to be an exhaustive list of stresses. It's just to get people thinking about some of those life events that can cause difficulty for people. But what we highlight is that these life events are often about some sort of loss. And understanding these losses are a really important step to understanding the impacts that they have on people. So if we look at them in terms of loss, we can view a relationship breakdown as a loss of a relationship. We can view financial stress as a loss of financial stability. We can view someone who's struggling with mental health difficulties as a loss of control over their well-being or their emotional state. So one way or another, most stresses that we experience are about some sort of loss. So we want to highlight, if people are going through some of these stresses or they've had some of these losses, how might they change? What are their behavior changes? What are the things that we might notice in them, knowing that we spend so much time with them and we do know their patterns of behavior and communication pretty well. We talk about the changes you might see as a result of some of these losses. And again, we just give a brief overview of some possible changes, something like mood changes or mood swings. Somebody who was fairly stable in their mood is now not so, and is swinging quite drastically in the way they behave. Someone might become numb or careless. Someone who was a really diligent worker and always dotted their I's and crossed their T's on their work is now making mistakes or doing things they wouldn't usually do. Or they might be numb emotionally. Someone who would engage in a conversation and really become involved in that conversation suddenly becomes sort of numb to emotional feeling. People might become distant. Someone who would engage in conversation in the lunchroom or around the water cooler or you know, after work on a site, they go to the pub and engage in that sort of social interaction part of the workplace, and now withdrawing themselves from that. They now eat their lunch alone, or they're not engaging in those same conversations. Could be attitude changes, or alcohol and drug misuse might become a problem. They could be gambling more as well. The last two here that we talk about giving away possessions and putting affairs in order. Now, these don't always occur, but we have heard stories of people who have gone on to take their lives, who have gifted small tokens of belongings that meant something to them, to friends and family prior to going on to take their life. And we know that this is a change in behavior. This is something that's a shift from the norm. The key we want to focus on when we're noticing these changes is just that they're changes. So we're starting to build a little bit of a picture. We understand that somebody's experienced some stresses, has been through some losses in their life. We've noticed some changes in their behavior. And from there, what we might also notice or get a gut feeling about is changes in their use of language or what they talk about or how they portray their well-being to us. We highlight loneliness as an example during the training because loneliness is something that is not often spoken about quite openly. It's not very often that you get somebody to come up to you and say, look, I'm really lonely. Can you help me with that? Rather, you hear it in the stories and the way that they talk. So if you were to ask somebody, hey, what did you get up to on the weekend? And their response was, I didn't do anything. I just sat at home and had a few beers and watched the football. Well, that might be a wonderful weekend for a lot of people. If you know that that person used to be out with their kids or out with their family or out engaging in social activities, and that response becomes one of isolation weekend after weekend after weekend, you start to pick up a sense that something's not right in that person. A few more things we discuss is conversation around hopelessness. Somebody might say something like, no matter what I do, nothing ever seems to get better. Well, you can't do anything about it. It's just always going to be that way. And we can pick up the hopelessness in their conversational style. People might talk about escape and escaping situations or escaping what's going on for them, and also burden. People might say things like, no, I don't want to come out tonight. I'm not in a really good space. You guys go out without me. Or I'll just slow you down. You go ahead. And what we know is people who do take their own life genuinely feel like a burden to the people around them. Their perception is that people will be better off without them. And we understand that generally we're becoming pretty good as a society at picking up depressed conversation. We know that 1 in 6 Australians, and I'm not sure what the figures are in New Zealand, but I would suggest it would be about the same, are currently suffering with depression or anxiety or both. So the chances are, if you haven't gone through that yourself or aren't going through that yourself, you know someone that is, and we become accustomed to that negative, really unoptimistic sort of conversational style. But from their language, we get this gut feeling. And what we ask people to do is piece this puzzle together and understand, look, you know someone's been through some losses, you've noticed some changes in their behavior, and through their conversation, you feel that something's not right. So we are trying to encourage people at that point to initiate action and have either a conversation with that person or get somebody else who has the skills and confidence to be able to do that, to have that conversation. And again, we're trying to upskill our connectors and our assist workers to be available to have that conversation, and our GAT workers to be able to identify those issues. So as I said, that's just a small part of that training that we go through, and we talk a lot more about some of the delicacies of handling a conversation about suicide in our connector training, and more about people's journey towards suicide when we go through the assist training. But it is a really valuable sort of program, and that's how we sort of create a peer support based network within the industry. So moving on from that, obviously our program is based in something that sort of revolves around contact with people, and there's been a lot of change recently due to responses due to COVID-19 and the pandemic that has gone on. And I know we're probably from a lot of different locations at the moment, and everybody's at a different point in their journey. But our program's certainly based on noticing these changes and being able to have direct conversations with people. And as we've moved through different phases of social isolation and lockdown and being removed from our workforces and separating workforces, it's made it quite difficult for people to be outwardly focused and maybe pick up some of these signs and signals. And certainly the concern from social services and mental health services like ours has shifted to trying to build the resilience and well-being of people, and try and increase that help-seeking behaviour from the individual, because through social distancing and isolation, we may not necessarily have the contact needed for other people to pick it up. Mates in Construction has certainly looked into trying to provide a lot of information about some of the effects that COVID-19 can have on people, and I want to talk a little bit about that as we go forward. What I might do is I might just see if I can bring up another. No, I can't find it. 2 seconds. Yeah, there it is. So what we've done is sort of try to work with organizations and companies in the industry to give them a heads up on some of the things that people go through as we enter this phase of uncertainty, and hopefully come through the other end of it soon enough. But encouraging people to try and look after themselves as best they can during this very difficult time, and trying to remind people that it's really normal for people to experience heightened emotion when something like this occurs. It's really normal to feel sad. It's normal to be stressed. It's normal to be confused, scared, angry. It's really normal to have anxiety about the future and what this holds. And so many of us are in so many different situations that are being impacted differently from COVID-19. I've spoken with people who, certainly in Western Australia, have been on a mine site for close to 16 weeks and haven't been able to see their family because of border restrictions and the ability to go in and out, and are being quite isolated up there. We know I had one worker with us that wasn't able to get home to New Zealand to her family during that period of time, and that was really stressful for her. Some of us have partners, friends, or family who might have lost their job as a result, and that can be quite impactful along the way as well. Others may have people who have been diagnosed with COVID-19 and are physically vulnerable. So there's a wide range of impacts that are going on for the community, and the more that we can allow people to feel how they feel about that, the more they're able to sort of manage those emotional responses. But we do highlight that it's really important that if you are going through some emotional responses that are interrupting your ability to function or carry out your daily activities or your work roles, that it's okay and it might be time to talk to someone and get a little bit of help along the way. Some of the basic things that we can be doing during this period can involve things like, if you have to stay at home, stay healthy, eat well, sleep, keep up your exercise in whatever way you can. I know a lot of our general support systems and our well-being systems can be taken away from us during certain periods. Gyms get closed, sporting clubs get closed, a lot of recreational facilities get closed, and we're being told to separate socially. And these are all things that really support our mental health and well-being. And when we're in a normal cycle, we do these things passively. But trying to shift that idea of sort of passive maintenance to mental health to proactive maintenance of mental health is a big part of what we're trying to do. Have people understand that during times like this, you might need to place extra focus on your mental health and well-being, and find new ways and find ways of adapting or pivoting activities that you might have done, and try to consciously maintain your mental health moving forward. And trying to stay in contact with people through whatever means you can, whether that be on the phone, whether that be through Zoom or online, and try and really get that interaction however you can. Encouraging people to get the facts about what's going on. There's a lot of misinformation that floats around, and as the states and New Zealand, we all enter different phases, and state governments are responding in different ways, that information starts to become disconnected more and more. So trying to encourage people to rely on reliable sources for their information. And if that information becomes burdensome for you, if the news and articles and things on Facebook and all that starts to really impact you negatively, or change your outlook or your well-being, to try and limit that and spend less time sort of divulging, diving into negative news stories. Try and read some good news stories as well, and understand a balance to what's going on. Most importantly, draw on your skills. We all have skills, and we all have ways that we can utilize that help us along the way. What's gotten you through tough times in the past? When you've had difficult encounters or difficult times with your mental health, what's been there for you to help pull you out of that? And can you find a way to adapt that to your current situation? And of course, trying to reduce or limit our use of alcohol or drugs to deal with our any difficulties we might have, or deal with our emotions. So we've sort of shifted to that and put out another COVID fact sheet on site that has some links to people can go up and scan their QR codes and get information from a range of different sources, sort of like stuff for financial information and supports for businesses and the government economic responses, people to look after their mental health, so they don't have to actively search for that too much. These are now floating around sites all over New Zealand and Australia, and workers can just go up and scan the QR codes and get the information they need. So that it was sort of our initial response to it, and what we'd encourage workforces and individuals to be doing along the way. But we also know that as a result of, sorry, just trying to shift this back, as a result of COVID-19, there's been a lot of different impacts on the mental health systems, and we know that there's a lot of vulnerable people already within our society. People with pre-existing depression and anxiety prior to the COVID-19 pandemic still have those difficulties, and they're probably being impacted quite severely by changes to their circumstances, like we spoke about, like job loss, like financial insecurity, like insecurities about the future, like separation from family, and that can be quite impactful for people. And we know that around 1 in 6 Australians is currently experiencing depression or anxiety, or both, and that equates to about 3.6 million people in our country. And the difficulties with sort of managing that have have intensified because a lot of services and a lot of support structures have been forced to shift. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a second. But again, we spoke about the people forced to be in quarantine, making lifestyle adjustments, working from home, working away from home, trying to homeschool while we're working. All of these impacts require us to take a heightened view of our mental health and try and adapt as we move forward. And of course, the unemployed or casual workforce have some significant financial obstacles to overcome. And despite fairly supportive responses from the government, that's not going to be everlasting, and things are going to change as a result of investment dropping in building and construction. And I think we're probably 6 to 12 months from seeing the true financial impacts on our industry and our workforce. So where to from here? I was speaking in terms of some of the changes to the way services and supports are being run as a result. We know people are in need of things like counselling and mental health support, and a lot of the primary face-to-face services have had to adapt their mode of delivery and move from face-to-face to online-based service provision. Which places challenges on some people, some who might not be necessarily quite tech savvy enough to get that or miss that personal connection. It also limits the availability of primary services because, of course, they're at home with their kids or homeschooling or having the same impacts that everybody else is, and it just increases the strain on the services there. We know there's extra financial pressures on services. Pressure to sort of pivot operationally to find ways to offer their services that isn't face-to-face or isn't their conventional service models. And a lot of the funding
Liam, we've just lost your audio.
Sorry, I was informed we lost audio there. Am I back, Brad?
Yes, you are. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I'm not sure where we lost audio there, but I'll move on anyway because I know we're probably ticking on in time. So some of the changes that have sort of happened around the mental health and workplace space, I think, have been quite positive and are probably a little bit long overdue. Certainly a lot of organisations like Mates in Construction, but also commercial organisations in building and construction have moved to develop programs aimed at delivering resilience and wellbeing practices for their workforce, trying to speak more about some of the things I mentioned about eating healthy, getting good social networks, sleeping well, creating conversations around mental health within the workplace, which is really positive for us going forward. And I think we're going to spend more and more time in workplaces doing that for the betterment of our employees and for our companies as a whole. I think there has been an increased employee exposure to support information. I was really surprised previously at the amount of people that I'd speak to who had no idea what their EAP service was or how to access it or what sort of support it was or that it was covered by their employer. I speak to a lot of people that didn't understand the mental health care plan program and how doctors interact with GPs interact with people who are struggling with mental health. And I think a lot of that information is now being really pushed to people, and that can only be helpful. That can only help people access support and increase their tendencies towards seeking help, which can only have good outcomes along the way. And I think that's something that companies and the community need to really focus on. We've had a lot of radio stations and TV channels and musicians, and looking after your well-being has become a really prominent topic of conversation. And if that can endure beyond and on our way out of COVID, whenever and however that occurs, I think we'll be better off as a community and a society for it. Again, there's greater focus on help-seeking behaviour, but I think I've spoken enough about that. But one change that I've seen and we've implemented, and I know a lot of organisations are, is incorporating wellbeing checks into daily activities. The amount of meetings that I've been to where part of that meeting has been put aside to personally check in on people, understand where they're at in their COVID journey, but also where they're at in their mental health and well-being journey, and what sort of supports could be arranged before we dive into the getting this order done or conducting this daily business, has been really, really positive. And really putting effort into doing that more and more as we go through is going to be really important, because that can be done over the phone, it can be done via Zoom. It doesn't rely on people picking up changes or signs and signals or understanding. If we can take that time to talk to people about how COVID has impacted them, their families, their life, their well-being, and make that general practice in the interactions that we have and the daily activities that we undertake, we're going to go a long way to picking up people who are struggling and being able to support them. And you're going to get better at talking about how you feel and how you're processing what's going on, and you're likely to be offered help should you need it along the way. So that's really, I probably want to end there and just try and encourage people to focus on that last bit, knowing that we can work together, and as we develop these systems and mental health becomes part of our daily practice, that it will improve outcomes for everybody along the way if we can have more of those conversations. I will just throw up our helpline. We run that 24/7 helpline that is available to anybody in the industry and their families. So if you are struggling or you want any more information about our products or services and what we do, please give it a call. Our website's also there. So we've also conducted quite a body of research into mental health and wellbeing and suicide in the construction industry. And if you'd like to read any of that or get in touch with us about our program, please go for it. Other than that, thank you for your time, and I'll hand back over to Brad and await any questions that might come.
Thanks very much, Liam. That was great. And if you could just leave that further assistance and information slide up until the end of the webinar, that would be helpful as well.
Yep, absolutely.
I found that really interesting in the journey that you explained through the Mates in Construction program. One of the big ones, which I hadn't heard the term before, but the connector volunteers absolutely make sense, and particularly for workforces and larger workforces, I guess, where it's hard to get across to everybody, but having those connector individuals is a fantastic way to reach out. When we moved from there in your presentation across to understanding some of the signs, sensing, hearing and gut feel were a couple of the key ones. Also changes that we may see in an individual's daily routine and sort of being in tune with them. You move then over to the COVID aspect and where we're at in the new norm. I think you're trying to get that slide back up.
I am trying to get that slide back up, yep.
And then even, which I wasn't expecting, but a little bit of innovation through the Mates in Construction QR code access sheet, which is really clever. And then flowing on to probably where I've had more experience in the employee assistance programs and the wellbeing checks in the workplace, which is really important. I wouldn't mind just if we could just dig in a little bit further into the current COVID environment, and just in your experience, what are you seeing out there as a change in the workforces? Are we seeing more access to the EAP type support due to the stresses that people are under?
I can only speak from our experience in Western Australia, and we are certainly in a slightly different situation to some of the other states, being that we've had a very, very low number of COVID confirmed cases. But our initial experience when things were heightened at the start, we actually had less people coming forward for support. But as things started to open up and workplaces started to open up, our requests for support and help have increased significantly. So I guess people, as I said, this is just anecdotal, but I guess people went into a bit of a self-preservation mode for a period of time. And then as the financial and social impacts of that started to kick in, people are reaching out for help at a much higher rate at the moment.
And we're sort of seeing from a new normal through to a BAU, which will be different to pre-COVID. Once that settles over the next 12 to 18 months, that will become the new norm, I guess. There's going to be other pressures out there that people need to deal with, be it financial, work-related, and that flows on to everything else, personal relationships, etc. So that is something that we're going to have to get used to.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a complex situation, I suppose, socially and professionally, and it'll be.
Also, with employee assistance programs for workplaces that don't have them, obviously mates in construction have a helpline, and there are other organisations out there to help. But what about for people that aren't reaching those and we're not seeing the signs? Is that a situation that comes up very often where we don't see signs, we're not checking in on those people and they're really struggling?
Yeah, and I guess in general, even access to EAPs is probably lower than it should be, because there has been a bit of a lack of awareness. I mean, there's a range of different services that are available to people. There are a range of different phone services, as you said, not-for-profit counselling services. But there is risk there. There is risk due to social isolation, due to social distancing, due to workforces closing down, and companies that don't have EAP services don't have sort of structured supports in place, that we can always miss people, and that's where we need to really change how we approach this to try and encourage help-seeking behaviours, which I sort of spoke about quite a bit, and create environments where people feel comfortable coming forward themselves rather than being identified as struggling.
And one final question for me, and it's more around our staff members that are working individually on their own and spending longer periods of time on their own and not necessarily in an office environment. How do we, apart from reaching out to those people on the phone or trying to engage with them before or after work, how do we engage with those types of people to get them across what we're doing in the workplace?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously what you've said, trying to make those phone calls along the way, but the information provision around the support structures that are there, and ensuring that that's provided to them, whether it be electronically or through the mail, and then during those conversations that you do get, checking in and making sure that that's arrived, they've had a chance to read through it, they understand what's going on. Working alone for a long period of time can be really difficult for people, and quite often our general response to, oh, how are you doing, how are you coping, is, yeah, I'm fine, yeah, I'm all right. But we probably need to probe a little more beyond that initial conversation and just follow up that they are receiving the information that's being provided. They do understand it and they do know where their access points are.
Thanks for that. And we do have a question that has come through from the attendants.
Yep.
If you could explain what a mentally safe workplace is.
Yeah, absolutely. Workplaces are required to provide both mentally and physically safe workplaces. So when we talk about a mentally safe workplace, that's one that's free from things like bullying, free from language use that could be offensive or hurtful, like to a specific type of person, whether there is racial language or whether there's language that might be offensive to LGBTI communities, and trying to understand that there's a responsibility on the employer to allow the worker to go home safe, both physically and mentally, from their job. So mentally safe workplaces are ones that embrace mental health promotion and understand that it's not only physical risk that you put your workers through when they go to work, you also need to care for their mental health as well.
Absolutely. And Liam, do you have any tips on how to approach someone that you may be worried about?
Yeah, certainly. I guess the sort of brief that I would give somebody who is going to approach someone they're worried about would be to highlight why you're worried. So call it what it is. If you notice some of the changes that I've spoken to, you know that there's been some of the losses, or you know what's going on, to say, look, hi, I know you've been through this. I've noticed this. I can hear you saying this, and that causes me concern. I'm really worried about you. And to try and be direct and sincere with that. It can be really difficult and really confronting to have those conversations, but it's really important that we work through our own apprehension for that. And the way I like to phrase it, sort of frame it for people, is that if somebody came to you and asked you how you were doing with sincerity because they'd noticed some things, some changes in your behavior and what's going on, you're unlikely to get offended by that. So it's really unlikely that that person is going to be, take offense to you inquiring in the right way. But the easiest way is to just highlight what you're seeing, why you're asking, tell them what's going on for you and what you're observing. And this is why I'm asking you what I'm asking you, and I want to help.
And just a question with regards to suicide rates, particularly in the construction industry.
Yep.
Why do we see that tends to be a higher rate than other areas within the built environment? Do you have any data or any insight in that?
It's really hard to pin one reason to that. There's a lot of reasons that can contribute to that, such as long working hours, instability in the workforce. We know that a lot of construction companies have a lot of work at some times and no work at other times, and the ebbs and flows of the construction community heavily influence the financial state of the members of that community, and that financial state can then put additional pressures on as well. The stigma around mental health and help-seeking behaviour in the past has not been great, and being a fairly male-dominated industry, and an industry that hasn't necessarily, until more recently, really allowed for conversation with peers about life issues or mental health, probably plays a role in that. It's always really hard to determine with certainty what a cause of suicide is, because unfortunately your data moves on with the person you lose. But there's a lot of different factors that we believe sort of contributes to that.
Look, we're right on the hour now, so we might leave it there. Liam, thanks so much for your time, and to Mates in Construction as well for today's important discussion about mental health, wellbeing and suicide in the workplace. Thanks also to CIBSE for allowing us to present this important topic for the industry as well. thanks to all of the attendees for attending today. Have a great night, everybody, and thank you very much.
Thank you.